Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Late Night Brew, where we talk the brews first and then we get around to what we're supposed to after. Joining me for the final episode in this series, Joe. Thank you, sir, as always.
Absolutely wonderful to be here.
Before we dive into talking about the performance and order of importance, I guess you could call it,
Mhm.
for the migration, what brew are you having with me?
Well, you know me. I'm usually going pretty simple. Today it is literally just let's see if we can see it.
There we
Sprite
are.
bottle of Sprite. Yeah.
Fair, fair.
So mhm.
It's starting to warm up, so I'll call it in the interest of hydration.
That's right.
I have got a Belgium beer actually,
Mm,
Saint Bernardus Wit. So it's a your classic white ale. It's good
mm,
stuff, and I call it the all season. You know, a
mm.
good wheat works
Yep.
all the way around.
Yep. Excellent.
So
Yeah, but it's very good.
yeah, it's quite enjoyable. Now, diving right in
Mm,
to minimize the suspense, what are some strategies to ensure that, the performance, the migration as a whole goes well?
mhm. Yeah, so on the email front, Microsoft does allow you to raise or basically eliminate the throttling thresholds from an email perspective, but it's only on email. When you're trying to
Right.
do the other workloads like Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, which are all hitting the SharePoint API, that's where you have to get real creative. But even for email itself, if we go back to messaging, if you have, small customers of less than, say, 500 users, not a big deal. You might be able to throw all your mailboxes in one batch and just run them.
Right.
But for larger customers, they really need to think about splitting up the batches and staggering them. Most of the software vendors have recommendations around how many mailboxes or SharePoint sites and so forth to sync at one time. And it's best to follow those limits and then stagger the batches as well, usually within 20 to 30 minutes. Once a batch starts actually processing and getting up to speed, then you can sort of kick off the next one without interrupting what's already occurring. So that's definitely a strategy from an email perspective. SharePoint
Right.
Teams and OneDrives, it gets much more complex because they're all competing for that API, and Microsoft heavily throttles that API specifically during work days because everybody's using Teams and so forth. So you have to get very creative. You want to get, you really want to break down order of precedence as far as priorities, like
Mm.
maybe what SharePoint site should go first versus last, which team should go first, and
What
users
are
as well. Hmm.
users actively
Hmm.
needing if
Yep.
uh, I always like to think of it of, if things went wrong, what are the
Hmm.
couple of sites or the most important sites that everything else can fall off a cliff and be
Hmm.
handled,
Yep.
but these are your priority
Hmm.
objectives, right?
Yep.
These are our lifeblood.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, leading up to the migration, of course, you're pre-staging data,
Oh
and
yeah.
so, but you still, even though everything's pre-staged, you can't take, 20,000 objects all over at once. It's just not going to happen. So you really have to, strategically plan out. If you're doing, let's say, a weekend cutover, you have to really strategically plan out over the course of that weekend what goes when and in
Yeah.
what order and so forth, and just manage that and set expectations with the end users to say, not all of the data will potentially be there on Monday morning, but we'll have the most critical data. For instance, even like a mailbox, your inbox and all of your more recent items will be there, but maybe you won't have your dumpster, your recoverable items available,
Yeah.
right? Because usually the dumpster can be very big. It's one of the last things we process from an email perspective. Or in archive mailbox as well. That's usually, again, one of the last things we process. As long as the user has their current mail that they're operating in, that's the most critical piece for them. Same thing with OneDrive, right?
Yep.
OneDrive is usually the next workload, or at least the first workload to go on a SharePoint side, and then you start staggering in the sites and teams and so forth. But you still have to, again, get very strategic with all of that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I'll actually challenge you
Mhm.
because you said it in passing,
Mhm.
and a incredibly important strategy is that pre-staging. I'd say
Mhm.
that's strategy number one or two
Mhm.
outside of good planning, like you say.
Mhm.
Getting that hey, we're gonna in the month, let's say leading up to cutover, we're
Mhm,
gonna have that running in the background. We're gonna be pulling that old data, and
mhm,
seeding the older. Yeah, this hasn't been used in 6 months, so let's pull
mhm,
that in, and then it's only 6 months worth of mail or
mhm.
documents that we're moving on the cutover. So I'll it might just be, we're so used to thinking like that,
Right.
but I want to
Obvious,
challenge,
yeah.
hey, that's
Mhm.
that's an important strategy right there.
Yeah, it's not horribly obvious, but yeah, usually we'll start with when you first kick off that sync, we'll go with like anything older than 60 days old. But then as we get closer to migration, we might bring it up to 30 days and then maybe a week out from migration, bring it up to like say 15 days or less, so that then come cutover, you're only migrating, let's say less than maybe 10 days of mail or something like that.
Yeah.
Mhm,
You alluded to it a little bit, so I wanted to get a quick clarity of when you're looking at everything that we have to migrate from a tenant, what's the order of, is it mail, OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint? Is
mhm,
it, mail, Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint? Or even is there an
mhm.
order? Or is it every customer has their own unique requirement?
Yeah, the top priority is always end user specific. So you can run the email and the OneDrive workloads at the exact same time because there's no conflict there from a platform
API,
perspective.
yeah.
Yeah. So you say Friday night, okay, we're gonna kick off the final migration of all of the users' mailboxes and all the users' OneDrives. Boom, that completes. Let's say now it's Saturday morning, that completes. Then you start working through, and this is where your order of precedence and priority comes in, right? Where, okay, are there certain teams that are more important than SharePoint and so forth? You just have to stack rank those and then just do your best to manage those. So I'd love to give you a like, yep, then SharePoint, then Teams, but sometimes it goes Teams and SharePoint. Sometimes it's a combination of the two if they both meet, whatever the criteria is for the number of sites being migrated at the same time. I know I did one where we would actually run like 5 SharePoint sites and 5 teams at the same time, as opposed to
Yeah.
20 SharePoint sites and no teams, just because, again, the priority was on those particular sites and those particular teams. So you can
Yeah.
get pretty creative pretty quick for sure. Yep.
I would say, to sum it up, it's my favorite answer in my lifetime as a consultant of, well, it depends.
Yeah, it depends. But there are always going to be workloads that come at the very end. Like I
Yeah.
mentioned, the archive mailbox, the recoverable items. Teams chat, that's another one that just takes a real long time to process. And so usually that's one of the very last things you migrate as well. So there are definitely workloads that absolutely wait till the very end that are not, I won't say not critical, but they're
Low
less
priority.
critical, low priority, yeah, than the other workloads. But it's that middle ground that you just have to play with a little bit.
Suss out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, on that lovely note, that ends the episode and the
Wow.
series. Joe, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate having you on. This has been a really good one. So I am looking forward to our next series, whatever that may be.
Me too. Yeah. Wonderful.
Until until then, sir, take care.
Yep.
Cheers,
Take care. Cheers.
and until the next one.